The last thing Sergeant Dara Voss remembered before she stopped counting her breaths was the smell of her own blood and the sound of something moving in the dark between the wreckage. She had been dying for 6 hours. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive, a low pressure in the chest, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the corridor, a slowness creeping into her fingers that no amount of willpower could push back. The crash had opened her up along her left side, a jagged gash from the collapsed bulkhead of the Meridian's lower deck, and she had packed the wound with the last of the emergency gauze from the medkit before the medkit slid into the smoke and the dark, and she lost it. The Meridian, God. She still couldn't say the name without her jaw tightening. 612 people. That was the manifest she'd memorized on boarding at Callisto Station. 612 colonists, contractors, and crew bound for the Aurum Belt, humanity's newest and most ambitious deep space resettlement project, the kind of thing that put a catch in the throat of every politician who said the words "New Frontier" on camera. She was their security chief. 43 years old, 2 combat tour behind her in the Proxima corporate disputes, the kind of quiet competence that gets you assigned to something you're supposed to keep safe. They had been 5 days out when the Velkorath took them. She hadn't known the name then. She'd thought it was a debris field at first, then a solar event, then a weapons malfunction, the bridge exploding in cascades of system failures before anyone could string 2 coherent reports together. By the time she understood there was a ship out there, a thing that moved like nothing she had ever seen on any registry or threat assessment, the Meridian had been pulled from its trajectory and was being cracked open like a nut. Now she was in what remained of the ship's hospital deck, which had been the deepest interior section and had survived better than most. The lights ran on backup cells, a dim amber that turned everything to old photographs. 14 people had made it here in the first hours. Medical staff, a few passengers who'd had the luck or instinct to run inward instead of toward the hull sections. She'd organized them, set watches, inventoried what they had. She was good at that. She was good at being the one who walked slowly through a crisis and said what needed to be done next, and people listened because she had that in her voice, a flatness that didn't waver. Then the Velkorath came inside. Not all at once, not loudly. That was the thing about them that kept crawling back to her now, lying here with her side torn open and her body temperature dropping by degrees she could feel but not measure. They didn't howl. They didn't announce. They moved through the wreckage the way dark moves through a room when you turn off the last light, not a thing that happens to you, just a thing that is. Dr. Ellison was taken in the night watch on the second day. She'd heard nothing. No scream, no struggle, just an empty post in the morning and his coffee still warm in the cup. Commander Hareth, her second on the third night. Again, nothing. It was Nessa who figured it out first. Nessa was 22, a hydroponics tech with a biology background she hadn't stopped apologizing for since the crash because she thought it wasn't useful enough. She'd been tracking the temperature fluctuations in the corridor outside the ward, because she tracked things. It was what she did, and she noticed that wherever the Velkorath passed, the temperature dropped by 3 degrees for exactly 4 minutes and then recovered. She drew a map of their routes on the inside of a food packaging wrapper in her own handwriting, small and precise, and she showed it to Dara without preamble, just placed it on the floor in front of her like a document being filed. "They're circling," Nessa said. "I know. They're not hungry. Not in the way animals are. I don't know how to explain it, I think they're curious." Dara had looked at the map. She had not told Nessa that she agreed, because the agreement felt too large to say out loud. The Velkorath didn't eat their victims in the way the early reports had described when the first human ships went missing near the outer belt. Those reports had been wrong, she thought, or incomplete, written by people who hadn't been close enough to see clearly. The ones they'd taken weren't eaten. They were changed. She'd seen Ellison once after, moving in the corridor outside the ward during a watch change, moving wrong, his silhouette familiar but his gait too fluid, too quiet. She'd fired twice and missed, and he'd melted back into the dark, and she hadn't slept properly since. By day 6 there were 8 of them left, by day 7 5. And by the hour before she got her side opened up by the bulkhead collapse, 4. Herself, Nessa, a man named Carver who was 50 years old and had been a geology surveyor, and who kept a worn photograph of twin daughters in the breast pocket of his jacket, and touched it with his thumb at regular intervals, the way other people said prayers. And a teenage boy named Pell, who had been traveling alone to meet his father at the colony, and who hadn't spoken more than 6 sentences to anyone since the crash, but who Dara had watched hold Nessa's hand for exactly 90 seconds once, when she had a panic attack at 3 in the morning, and who she had decided, on the evidence of those 90 seconds, was probably going to be worth something if they got out of this. They had been moving to the deeper engineering section when the secondary collapse happened. She'd pushed Nessa clear and taken the strut across her side for it, and when she came up off the floor, Carver was hauling her vertical with both hands and his jaw set, and she'd told him go with the others, get to the engineering core, she would follow. He'd looked at her the way people looked when they knew you were lying and decided to let you. He took Nessa's arm and Pell's shoulder and he went, and Dara Voss stood in the amber-lit wreckage of the corridor alone with her hand pressed to her side and the blood running between her fingers, and she thought, this is probably where I stop. She did not sit down. Sitting down felt like a decision she wasn't ready to make. She leaned against the wall instead, and she breathed, and she counted the breaths, and she thought about her mother's voice. Her mother had worked medical transport in the early colony era, rattling between the Moon and the L5 platforms in ships that made the Meridian look like a luxury liner, and she had a habit when Dara was a child of singing under her breath, while she worked nothing recognizable, just low, formless melodies that existed to fill silence. Dara found herself humming one of them now, standing in the dark with her blood on the floor, something her mother had sung while stitching up a crewmate's arm at a kitchen table that had also been an operating table. She didn't know why. It seemed like the thing to do. The temperature dropped 3 degrees. She went still. Not still like fear, still like an old reflex engaging. The combat-trained stillness that is not the absence of readiness, but the exact fullness of it. Something moved in the dark at the end of the corridor. It was not Ellison. It was not any of the ones she'd seen changed. It was different. Smaller in some way that was hard to quantify, which was strange because the Velkarath she had seen moved with an enormousness that went beyond physical size, a presence that filled whatever space they occupied the way a sound fills a room. This one moved carefully, deliberately, and it moved toward her, not from the sides the way the hunting ones moved, but straight down the center of the corridor in the light. She raised her sidearm. She had 4 rounds left. The figure stopped just at the edge of the amber light. She was Velkarath. That was unmistakable. The height, the secondary joint in the limbs, the faint bioluminescence under the skin that pulsed like something breathing. But the face, the Velkarath she had seen before had faces like masks, expressionless in the way that still architecture is expressionless, not blank but fixed, committed. This one's face was something else. There were expressions moving across it, several at once, layered the way music is layered, and none of them were ones Dara had a word for, but one of them, she was almost certain, was something in the register of grief. The alien's eyes were deep gold, and they did not look away from Dara's. "Sergeant," it said. Dara's finger stayed on the trigger. "You know my rank. We know everything about your ship." The voice was low and precise, the vowels slightly wrong in a way that suggested a language being translated through something other than a mouth. "We have studied humans since your colony ships first reached this sector. We know your ranks. We know your biology. We know what is happening to you right now, the thing you are not saying to yourself yet. I'm listening. You will be dead in 1.4 of your hours. The wound is not survivable without intervention. I can intervene." "Define intervene." A pause. The gold eyes moved to the wound and back to her face. Our word for it does not translate cleanly. Your word closest to it is probably convert. But that word does not carry the right weight. The people your kind took from my ship, Ellison, Hareth, the others. They are changed, they are not dead, they are not in pain. Something moved across the alien's face again, a ripple of the layered expressions. They were not given a choice. I do not agree with that. I have not agreed with it for some time. Dara kept the sidearm level. Why are you here then? Because you are dying and I want you to choose. The alien took one step forward into the full light, and Dara saw her clearly for the first time. The bioluminescent tracery under the skin like circuits lit from inside. The elongated fingers. The secondary eyelids that moved horizontally across the gold eyes like a camera aperture adjusting. She was extraordinary in the way that very old things are extraordinary, the way the deep ocean is extraordinary, beautiful and entirely indifferent to whether beauty was something you could survive. Our kind feeds on what humans would call bioelectric potential, the electrical field that living things generate. Your species is remarkable in this regard. More than any species we have encountered. You burn so brightly. You're vampires, Dara said. I mean, not exactly, but that's the word. Your mythology predicted us better than your science did, the alien said, and there was something in the layered expressions that Dara thought might have been amusement, deep and genuine. We do not drink blood. We do not require it. But your blood is irrelevant to the process. As a medium. And the people you changed, they became like you. They became like us, yes. The alien was quiet for a moment. In our history, there is not a tradition of asking. We found things that burned brightly and we consumed them or we kept them. Humans are the first species we have encountered who burned so brightly that consuming them felt like waste. She paused. I am the first of my kind who felt that way. I was not the last, but I was first. That distinction has cost me significantly. Dara felt the blood moving between her fingers. She felt the cold creeping up her arm. She thought about Carver touching the photograph of his daughters. She thought about Nessa's map, precise and careful on a food wrapper. She thought about Pell's 90 seconds of held hand in the dark. If I say yes, she said, what happens to my people? The gold eyes didn't waver. Tell me where they are. That's not an answer. No, the alien agreed. It is a request for information so that I can protect them. They are in the engineering section. I know the routes my hunters take. I can direct them away. Your people can reach the secondary evacuation corridor if they move in the next 2 hours and from there to your auxiliary shuttle bay. There is a vessel there. It is intact. Dara was quiet for a long moment. The amber light hummed. Somewhere deep in the wreckage, something settled and groaned. Why, she said, does a Velkorath care whether 3 humans get out of a crashed ship? The layered expressions again, complex and untranslatable. Because I have been watching your species for 40 years, the alien said. I have watched you build things and break them and build them again. I have watched you carry your dead and name them and light fires for them. I have watched you hold hands in the dark. A pause so small it was barely a pause. You hum, Sergeant. You have been humming since I entered the corridor. You do not know the name of what you were humming, but it was something a person you loved gave you, and you carry it the way we cannot carry anything. You are impermanent and fragile, and you burn so brightly, and I am tired of watching my kind extinguish you. Dara lowered the sidearm. Not because she trusted this creature completely, not because she had run out of fear, but because she was dying anyway and the people in the engineering section needed what time they could get, and because something in the alien's voice, in that layered grief register she didn't have a word for, was the most honest thing she had heard since the meridian had been torn open. All right, she said, tell me what it feels like. The alien walked toward her slowly, the bioluminescence pulsing in long, steady waves now. It feels like waking up, she said, and then remembering everything. She was close, very close. She was taller than Dara by almost a foot, and the gold eyes were level with Dara's and not looking away. And Dara had the sudden and absolute certainty that this alien was frightened too, not of Dara, but of something else, something the alien carried the same way Dara carried her mother's melody, something unresolved. "What's your name?" Dara asked. The alien said something that wasn't quite a sound, a resonance in the chest rather than the air. "Your language does not have the phonemes. Your people have called me Vel for brevity in the contact reports." "Vel," Dara said. "I'm Dara, you can call me Dara." Something moved across the alien's face that Dara would spend a very long time afterward trying to name. It was not a human expression. It was not grief or joy or gratitude or any single thing. It was all of those, simultaneously layered, the way her mother's wordless melodies were simultaneously comfort and loss and time, and everything that can't be said in language. "Dara," Vel said and leaned close and whispered, "I'm going to bite you now, don't fight it. Your body will try to fight it, don't let it." "What do I do instead?" So Dara Voss, Sergeant Security Chief, 43 years old, dying on the floor of a wrecked colony ship in the deep dark between stars, leaned her head back against the cold wall and hummed her mother's wordless melody while a vampire alien woman bent close and the pain came, bright and enormous, like every light in the universe switching on at once. And then it changed. There was no good way to describe the after, and Dara spent a long time not trying. The physical change was immediate and verifiable. The wound closed, not gradually but in seconds, the tissues reknitting with a warmth that was almost pleasant, the cold receding, the blood loss reversing in some metabolic process she couldn't name. But the rest of it, the rest was like being handed an entirely new set of senses, and being told they had always been there, and you simply hadn't known how to use them. She could feel the electrical fields of living things, not as metaphor, as fact, like a new organ activating. She could feel Carver's field 3 corridors away, steady and slow like a lighthouse, and Nessa's quick and bright and terrified, and Pell's low and controlled in a way that told her more about that boy's interior life than he had revealed in any of the 6 sentences. She could feel Vel standing next to her, a vast and ancient and complex field, layered the same way the expressions were layered, old grief and older knowledge, and something current and unresolved that felt like hope. She stood up, she checked her sidearm out of habit, then she looked at Vel. "The route to the engineering section," she said. "Tell me." "I said I would lead your people to the evacuation corridor." "I'll do it." Dara's voice was the same as it had always been, flat, even. The kind of voice that doesn't waver. "You said your kind would need to be redirected. Can you do that from here? Keep them clear of the route." Vel studied her. The gold eyes moved across her face with the careful attention of something reading. "Yes, for approximately 90 minutes. "That's enough." Dara moved toward the corridor. "Dara." She stopped. "You are changed," Vel said. "But you are not what they are. The others who were taken. They were not given the choice and they came through it differently. You are something that has not happened before in our record." A pause. "I don't know what you will be." Dara thought about that for a moment. She thought about her mother's melody and Carver's photograph, and Nessa's careful maps, and Pell's 90 seconds of kindness in the dark. She thought about 612 names on a manifest she had memorized, and the weight of them. She thought about the thing Vel had said about burning brightly. "I'll figure it out," she said. "We're good at that." She went. The corridors of the Meridian were darker now, the backup cells failing one by one, but the darkness didn't stop her. She moved through it as easily as through light. The electrical fields of the ship's remaining systems mapped to her like a blueprint she'd always known. She felt the Velkorath hunters as pressure changes in the dark, attended each one the way you attend the movement of weather, and she moved between them the way Nessa had mapped their routes. Through the gaps, through the spaces they left, through the dark between the dark. She found Carver first. He was in the secondary maintenance junction, pressed flat against the wall with his back to the bulkhead and a section of pipe in both hands, and when she came around the corner, he swung the pipe at her head and she caught it one-handed without thinking, and they both stopped and stared. "Voss," he said. "Carver." He looked at her. He was a perceptive man, the kind whose survival instinct had been sharpened by 40 years of work in remote geological surveys, where noticing the wrong thing too late meant dying alone in a rock face. He looked at her the way he looked at core samples, with careful attention to the details that told the true story. "What happened to you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'll explain later. Where are Nessa and Pell?" "Next junction, 40 meters. We heard the collapse and doubled back." He didn't move. His thumb found the photograph in his breast pocket, pressed it once, let it go. "Are you?" "I'm Dara Voss," she said. "I'm the same person who organized your watches and inventoried your supplies and told you to ration the thermal blankets. I'm the same person who pushed Nessa out of the way of that strut." She held his gaze. "I am not what they are. I can explain why later when we're not in a burning ship." A pause. "I need you to trust me for 70 minutes. Carver looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he put the pipe down. 70 minutes, he said. They moved. Nessa's face when she saw Dara was a whole conversation compressed into a fraction of a second. Relief, confusion, fear, relief again, question. Pell looked at Dara the way he looked at everything, with more attentiveness than most adults brought to things. He was 17 years old and had been traveling alone across deep space to meet a father he barely knew, and the Velkarath had taken his ship apart around him and he had not broken. He looked at Dara and he said, "You're different." "Yes," Dara said. "Are you going to hurt us?" "No." He considered this. "Okay," he said and picked up his pack. That was all. 4 syllables and they were moving. Dara filed it away next to the 90 seconds of held hand. The route Vel had given her was not short, but it was clear. The pressure changes of the hunters moving away, redirected. The electrical fields pulling toward the upper sections as whatever signal Vel was sending drew them from their patrol patterns. 3 times they came close enough that Dara could feel the particular quality of the Velkarath's vast and hunting field like a pressure behind her eyes. And 3 times she guided the others flat against walls and through junctions and around corners, and the dark passed over them like weather and moved on. The secondary evacuation corridor was intact. The doors opened on manual. The auxiliary shuttle bay was at the end of it, the ship there dusty and untouched and sealed, the automated systems still cycling their maintenance checks on battery power, faithful and oblivious. Carver knew the shuttle systems. He'd done emergency transport certification after a survey partner had died waiting for extraction on a rock, with no one qualified to fly. He had the pre-launch sequence running in 4 minutes while Nessa strapped herself in, and Pell did the same beside her without being asked, which struck Dara as the most mature thing she had seen anyone do in a week. She stood at the bay entrance. Vel was there. She hadn't heard her come. Of course she hadn't. The gold eyes in the dark were the same as they'd been in the corridor, attentive, layered, old. The bioluminescence was quiet now, almost dormant. "They're getting out," Dara said. "I know, I can feel them." Vel paused. "What will you do?" Dara looked back at the shuttle, Carver running his checks with his jaw set and his hands steady. Nessa already working on something at the nav console, making a map of the exit route out of the habit she brought to everything. Pell watching Carver's hands and learning the sequence without being told to, because that was the kind of person he was turning out to be. She turned back to Vel. "Come with us," she said. Vel was quiet for a moment, very quiet. "My kind will not." "I'm not asking your kind." Dara met the gold eyes. "I'm asking you. You said you haven't agreed with what they do for some time. You said you were first to disagree. That means you've been carrying that alone. She paused. You don't have to. The layered expressions, every single one of them. You are very strange, Vel said quietly. I'm human, Dara said. It's kind of our thing. The launch sequence alarm chimed in the bay. Carver's voice, Voss, 30 seconds. Dara held Vel's gaze. Your call. You have 29 seconds. She turned and walked to the shuttle and strapped herself in. She did not look back. She counted to 28 and heard, at 29, the particular shift in the electrical field of the bay that meant a very large, very old, very complicated being had made a decision and stepped through a door. The shuttle bay doors opened on the cold dark of space, and beyond them the wreckage of the Meridian drifted in pieces against the slow fire of the Orem belt, and the shuttle pushed itself through the gap and out into the nothing, and Dara Voss breathed. She felt all of them, Carver at the controls, his field slow and steady as a tide. Nessa at nav, her field quick and precise, already building a map in her head. Pell in the seat beside her, his field low and controlled, and she noticed now, for the first time with this new sense, not afraid. He hadn't been afraid since the third day. That was something. And Vel in the seat behind her, filling the small space with an electrical field so ancient and vast that it should have been overwhelming and wasn't, because it was, underneath all its layers, quiet. Like something that has been wound tight for a very long time and finally, in this moment, isn't. Dara hummed her mother's melody, just a few bars, low under her breath. Behind her, after a moment, she felt Vel's attention shift toward her. The gold eyes, she knew without looking, were open and still and paying attention with the same quality that they'd paid attention to her in the corridor, as if she was the most interesting thing that had ever existed. What is that? Vel asked. Something my mother gave me, Dara said. I don't know the name of it, she never named it. A long pause. The stars moved slowly past the windows. The wreckage of the Meridian grew smaller behind them. Will you teach it to me? Vel asked. Dara thought about this for a moment. She thought about all the things that had no names. The expression on a vampire alien's face that is grief and wonder and something else simultaneously. The way a geology surveyor touches a photograph. The way a 17-year-old holds someone's hand in the dark without being asked. The way humanity carries its dead and names them and lights fires and hums when there is nothing else left to do. Yeah, she said, I will. She hummed it again, slow and low, and she felt Vel listening with her whole body, the way very old things listen, when they finally hear something they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. Nessa plotted the exit route in her careful handwriting on the nav console, precise and small. Carver flew the shuttle with both hands and his jaw set, and his daughters safe in his breast pocket. Pell watched the stars with the patient attention of someone learning something important. And the Velkarath woman who had chosen a thing no one in her species had chosen before sat in the dark of a human shuttle and learned a melody that had no name, and the stars burned all around them, and the deep dark wasn't dark anymore. It was full of things that burned brightly. In the early contact reports that came out of the Orem belt in the months after the Meridian incident, human analysts struggled to categorize what had happened. The official designation was hostile first contact event, outcome, partial. 12 colonists converted without consent, 3 surviving, 1 evacuation vehicle recovered. The Velkarath logged as a Class IV predatory species, aggressive, organized, avoid recommended. What the contact reports did not capture, because contact reports are not built to capture certain things, was the negotiation that began 4 months later when a shuttle carrying a human security chief and a Velkarath elder with gold eyes arrived at Callisto Station under a frequency that had been used historically for ceasefire requests, and also, apparently, for music. What the contact reports did not capture was the 6-hour deposition that Dara Voss gave to the Colonial Security Council in which she said, among other things, that the Velkarath were not what their threat profile described, and that the assumption of predation without reason was an error, and that there was a faction within the Velkarath who had been waiting, for longer than humans had been in space, for the thing that humans might be willing to offer. Not territory, not resources, not alliances in the tactical sense, but the specific and irreducible thing that only humans seemed to carry into the dark with them, which was the ability to name what they loved and carry it forward and hum it under their breath when they were afraid. What the contact reports did not capture was Vel sitting in the observation deck of Callisto Station at 3 in the morning, looking at the stars she had traveled for 40 years without ever having a word for what she was looking for, while Dara sat beside her and taught her, note by note, a melody that had no name. What the contact reports did not capture was the moment Nessa published her navigation maps of the Velkarath patrol routes, precise, small handwritten, meticulous, and they became the basis for the first coexistence corridors in the belt, the lanes where human ships could travel without incident, because a 22-year-old hydroponics tech had been paying attention when no one else thought it mattered. What the contact reports did not capture was Pell, 2 years later, at 19, filing a request to study xenobiology at the Colonial University. His application essay, a single page describing 6 seconds in a dark corridor when a boy who hadn't spoken in days held a frightened woman's hand because it was the right thing to do, and how that had led, in a way he was still tracing, to an alien species choosing something different. What the contact reports did not capture was Carver, at the reunion that happened informally and without ceremony when the 4 of them were all at Callisto at the same time, pulling out his worn photograph of twin daughters and showing it to Vel without explaining why, and Vel holding it carefully in her elongated hands and looking at it with the gold eyes for a long time, and then looking at Carver and saying, simply, "They look like you." And Carver saying, "Yeah, they do." What the contact reports did not capture was any of the small true things that the Velkarath had been watching humans do for 40 years, the things that made the brightest burning species they had ever encountered something more than just a food source and something less than comprehensible. The way humans carry each other, the way they name their dead and light their fires, the way they hum in the dark, the way they push each other out of the way of falling things, the way they hold hands without being asked, the way they say, "This is my mother's melody. I don't know its name. I'll teach it to you anyway." The Velkarath had been predators for longer than Earth had had an atmosphere. They had taken hundreds of species across the centuries and consumed or kept them, and not one of those species had ever done what Dara Voss did in a dark and dying corridor on a wrecked colony ship in the deep dark between stars. She had asked the predator its name. She had said, "I'll figure it out. We're good at that." She had hummed. In the council chamber at Callisto Station, 40 months after the Meridian, Vel stood before a panel of human representatives and delivered the formal opening statement of what would become the first genuine interspecies dialogue in human history. She stood very still, the bioluminescence quiet under her skin, the gold eyes level with the chamber's ambient light. She said, "We have traveled this sector for longer than your civilization has existed. In that time we have encountered many species that burned brightly. None of them burned the way humans burn. We consumed many, we kept some. We were wrong." She paused. "Your species has something we do not have a word for. We have watched you carry it across the dark for decades. You hum songs with no names. You hold hands in the dark. You push each other out of the way of falling things. You are impermanent and fragile, and you burn so brightly that extinguishing you felt, to one of us first and then to others, like the most wasteful thing we had ever done." She paused again longer. "We would like to learn what you know," she said. "We have things to offer in return, but we recognize that we do not deserve to simply take. We are here because one of your kind made that clear, in a specific way, in a specific corridor, when there was no reason for her to do anything but die." The gold eyes moved briefly to Dara, who was sitting to the left of the panel with her hands on the table and her face the same as it had always been, flat and steady and present. She chose to teach instead. In the silence that followed, Dara Voss hummed 4 bars of her mother's melody. She did not mean to, quite. It came out the way things come out when your body has been carrying them long enough. The council chamber was very quiet. Then Vel, standing at the podium, hummed the same 4 bars back. And if there was anyone in that chamber who didn't understand at that moment what humanity had done, what humanity had always done, in every dark corridor and crashed ship and cold moment when the easy thing was to stop, they understood it then. You offer your hand in the dark. You hum the song with no name. You figure it out. That's the thing about humans. That's always been the thing. We simply don't know how to stop. The months after the meridian were not easy for Dara Voss. She would not have said so out loud, because saying so felt like a complaint she hadn't earned, given that she was alive when she should have been dead and standing upright when she should have been in a body bag drifting somewhere in the wreckage of a colony ship. But the truth was that the change Vel had given her in that amber-lit corridor was not a switch that flipped clean. It was a door that opened onto a room she hadn't known existed in herself, and adjusting to its dimensions took time. The biological changes were documented and measured at Callisto's medical facility over the first 6 weeks. She healed faster than any human baseline. A compound fracture she sustained during a training exercise reset itself in 11 days, which impressed the trauma surgeon and unsettled the base commander in roughly equal measure. Her sensory range had shifted in ways that were difficult to articulate, but that she kept trying to articulate because the medical team kept asking, and she was, fundamentally, someone who answered questions honestly. She told them, "It is like having spent your whole life hearing music through a wall and then suddenly the wall isn't there. You can hear everything that was always playing. You can't unhear it. You don't want to." What she didn't tell them, because it didn't fit into any diagnostic framework she was given, was that the change had not taken from her. That was the thing she had feared in that corridor, staring at the alien with her blood on the floor, that whatever conversion meant, it meant the erasure of something, the subtraction of some essentially human quantity that made her Dara Voss rather than something else in Dara Voss's shape. It hadn't. The melody was still there. Her mother's face was still there. The weight of 612 names was still there. Everything she had carried was still there. She carried more now, that was all. Vel lived at Callisto Station in a converted cargo bay that had been adapted to her needs: higher ceilings, lower temperature, a bioluminescent panel system that provided the specific frequency spectrum her kind required. She was not a prisoner. The designation was technically diplomatic guest, which was a category that hadn't previously existed in Callisto's administrative system, and required some creative paperwork on the part of the station administrator, a tired and meticulous woman named Commander Yi, who had spent 30 years keeping colonies running, and who took the existence of a 9-foot vampire alien from the outer belt in her cargo bay with the same careful efficiency with which she took everything else. Dara visited Vel every morning. Not for debriefing, there were people whose job that was, and she let them do it. She visited because Vel was, in some way she was still understanding, her responsibility, and because Vel was, this was harder to name but it was true, lonely in a way that was very old and very complete, the loneliness of something that has been singular for so long it had stopped expecting company. It was during one of these morning visits, 3 months in, that Vel told her about the other ones. "There are 4 of us," Vel said. She was sitting on the elevated platform that had been installed in the cargo bay, which put her eye level with Dara rather than looking down. She did this deliberately. Dara had noticed early and appreciated it. Who have disagreed with the taking? 4 out of a number I will not tell you, because the number would frighten the people in this station, and they are managing their fear adequately, and I don't want to make that harder." "Okay," Dara said. "4. 3 others besides myself. They are not here. They are in the belt, moving in patterns that keep them clear of the ones who still hunt. They have been doing this for different lengths of time. One of them has been doing it for longer than your species has been in this system." A pause. "They know what I did, what you are. They are interested." Dara turned her coffee cup in her hands. It was one of those gestures she'd noticed Vel cataloging, the small human tactile habits, the ways people kept their hands occupied when their minds were working. Vel watched her hands the way a student watches a demonstration. "Interested how?" Dara said. "They want to know if it is possible, what I did, not the conversion, the choice, whether a human can survive it as you have survived it, whether it changes the dynamic in the way I thought it might." Vel was quiet for a moment. "I was not certain it would work. I want to say that plainly. I was not certain you would come through it as yourself." "You didn't tell me that." "You were dying. The additional information would not have been useful." Dara considered this. "Fair," she said. "They want to meet you," Vel said. Dara thought about Carver, about his daughter's photographs. She thought about what it would mean to be sitting in a room with 4 beings who had watched her species from the darkness for decades, who had made a different calculation, who were waiting. She could feel it somehow, faintly, through whatever new sense connected her to Vel's field, not with patience exactly, but with something adjacent to it. Something that had given up patience a long time ago and was operating now on a more brittle resource. Something like hope, held carefully because it had been disappointed before. "Set it up," she said. The meeting happened 2 weeks later in the largest conference room on the station, which had been designed for 40 humans, and which now contained Dara Voss, Commander Yi, who had requested to be present, and whose presence Dara had argued for because Yi was the best person she knew at making impossible logistics feel manageable. Nessa, who had specifically asked to come, and who arrived with a new notebook and 2 pens, and the focused expression of someone who intended to write everything down. And 4 Velkarath who filled the room with their presence the way a sound fills a room, not physically but atmospherically. The electric weight of them perceptible to Dara as 4 distinct and enormous fields, and perceptible to the others as something they couldn't name, but that changed the quality of the air. Vel made the introductions in both languages, which meant that the Velkarath said things that resonated in the chest, and then Vel translated them into English, and the effect was something like listening to music with and without the bass register simultaneously. The 4 of them had names that didn't transliterate but that Vel gave human approximations for. Elder, which was the oldest. Strand, which was the one who had been protecting human ships for longer than humanity had been in the system. Reach, which was the youngest of them and the most visibly uncertain about what they were doing. And Depth, which said almost nothing but whose electrical field was so steady and deep that Dara felt it like standing near a very old ocean. Elder spoke first, through Vel, and said, "We want to understand what it is that you carry." Nessa, who had been writing, looked up. "Could you be more specific?" Elder turned the gold eyes to her. "The thing that makes some of you refuse to stop. We have studied your species for a long time. We have seen it in individuals and in groups. We have seen it in the small ones as well as the large. We have seen it in the dying." The eyes moved to Dara briefly. "We do not have it. We are very old and we do not have it, and we want to understand whether it can be given or only witnessed." "You're talking about stubbornness," Nessa said. "We are talking about more than stubbornness. We're talking about humans," Dara said quietly. "That's what we're talking about." Commander Yi said, with the practical precision that 30 years of impossible logistics had given her. "Can you describe what it looks like to you? What you observe when you observe it?" Strand spoke then, and when Vel translated it, the room was very quiet for a long moment. "We watched your first colony ship come through this system. It was damaged before it arrived. We had not damaged it, something in the transit corridor had. It was trailing debris and its life support was at 40% function. There were 900 people on it. They did not turn back. They ran repair cycles for 61 of your days while maintaining trajectory, taking turns on the repair teams, sleeping in shifts in the sections with the most functional heating. We watched them sing. A pause. Not in ceremony, in the small hours between shift changes. Just singing. While they fixed things that might not be fixable, while they did not know if they would arrive or die in transit, they sang. Nessa had stopped writing. We did not understand it, Strand continued. We observed it repeatedly. We observed it in subsequent ships. The songs were different. The function appeared to be the same, the maintenance of something we could not identify in conditions that should have extinguished it. The maintenance of the thing that makes you, continuous across crisis. Another pause. We began to protect the ships we could protect, not all of them, not quickly enough, but the ones we could reach. Depth spoke for the first time, brief, and Vel translated. You burn. You have always burned. We were wrong to try to consume the fire. Dara set her coffee cup on the table. She thought about her mother. She thought about a melody with no name. She thought about 900 people fixing a broken ship in the dark and singing between shifts, and how that was so ordinary and so impossible simultaneously that it was difficult to look at directly. Okay, she said, here's what I think we should do. She told them. It took an hour. Nessa wrote all of it down in her small, careful handwriting, and Commander Yi asked 3 questions that clarified the logistics, and the 4 Velkarath listened with their vast and ancient attention turned full on, which was, Dara had learned by now, what it felt like when a very old thing decided something was worth understanding. The framework she proposed was simple in structure and enormous in implication. A monitored coexistence protocol, jointly administered, human Velkarath, covering the transit corridors of the Orem Belt. Human ships would signal on a designated frequency, the same one Dara had used to bring Vel to Callisto. The Velkarath dissenters would monitor and redirect hunting parties away from the corridors, the way Vel had redirected them in the Meridian's final hours. In return, humanity would, and here was the part she had thought about longest, teach. Not technology, not weapons, not the things that could be bartered and measured. The thing that Strand had watched on that first colony ship. The songs. The way people kept their hands busy when their minds were working. The photographs carried in breast pockets. The 90 seconds of holding a frightened person's hand in the dark without being asked. The melodies with no names passed from a mother to a daughter in a kitchen that was also an operating table. You want to teach us, Elder said, through Vel, and the gold eyes were the most complicated she had ever seen them. Every layer simultaneously, the way a chord is every note simultaneously. I want to teach you what we know, Dara said, and I want you to teach us what you know, because we've been burning in the dark out here and you've been watching us and neither one of us knows what the other is. She paused. I think it's time we found out. The silence in the conference room was very long. Commander Yi was writing something on her own notepad with the careful deliberateness of someone who wanted to look busy while they felt something they didn't have a category for. Nessa was holding her pen but not using it. Reach, the youngest Velkarath, had shifted in a way that Dara felt rather than saw, a reorientation in their electrical field, a steadying, like something that had been uncertain becoming certain. Depp said one thing brief and Vel translated, yes. The other 3, after a moment, each said the same. That was how it started, not with a treaty or a ceasefire or a formal declaration. With 4 beings who had been watching humanity for decades finally in the same room with the humans, saying the word that humans said when they were afraid but choosing anyway, when they were dying but not stopping, when they were alone in the dark but still humming. Yes, yes, yes. In the years that followed, Dara Voss became something that didn't have an official title for a long time. She was listed in Callisto's administrative system as Security Chief, Ret. diplomatic liaison, and the designation Special Integration Consultant appeared later when someone in colonial administration needed something on a form and couldn't think of anything more accurate. What she actually was the person who stood in the space between two species that had been circling each other in the dark and showed them where to step. She was good at it. She had always been good at standing in the difficult space and saying what needed to be done next in a voice that didn't waver. The coexistence protocol worked. Not perfectly, nothing works perfectly, which is something Dara told both the Colonial Security Council and the Velkarath Elder Assembly approximately once a month in different terms, and which both parties found difficult to accept for different reasons. There were incidents. There were misunderstandings that required delicate untangling. There were Velkarath who did not agree with the dissenters, and who made the transit corridors dangerous for months at a time. And there were humans who looked at Dara Voss and saw something changed and used words she let go past her without letting them land. But the framework held. It held because of Nessa's maps, which became the basis for the navigation protocols. It held because of Carver, who went back to the outer belt as a survey consultant and who, when his shuttle was flagged by a Velkarath sentinel one night in a remote corridor, pulled out the photograph of his daughters and held it up to the sensor array, not as explanation, not as a rational communication, but as the thing it was, which was a gesture of, "This is what I am, this is what I carry, I am not only what you see," and the sentinel let him through. It held because of Pell, who at 19 was studying xenobiology, and who at 23 published the first serious academic paper on Velkarath bioelectric communication, which was so meticulous and so respectful of the complexity of the subject that Vel read it 3 times, and said it was the most accurate account of their interior experience any human had written. It held because of Vel, who chose every day to be the first thing she had been, who taught the other 3 dissenters what she had learned in a cargo bay and a conference room, and a series of morning visits with a human woman who hummed melodies with no names, who stood at a podium in a council chamber and told 2 species plainly what had to change. And it held because of Dara Voss, who was 43 years old and had been dying in a corridor and had asked a predator its name, and said, "I'll figure it out," and meant it, and who carried her mother's melody through everything that followed the same way she had carried it through the corridor. Not because it was armor, not because it gave her power, but because it was the truest thing she had, and in the dark, you carry the truest thing you have. She hummed it at the ratification ceremony, quietly, under her breath, the way her mother had hummed under hers while stitching up a crewmate at a kitchen table, the way humans hum in the small hours between shift changes, between crisis and the next crisis, in the dark that never quite goes away. Vel heard it from across the room. Of course she did. She hummed it back. And the room was full of aliens and humans and all the weight of everything that had almost gone wrong, and the melody had no name, and the dark was full of things that burned brightly, and the truest thing about humanity was this and had always been this. We don't know how to stop. We simply don't. There is a thing that happens in the 9th year of the coexistence protocol, small enough that it doesn't appear in any report and doesn't need to. A young Velkarath, not one of the dissenters but a new one, the 3rd generation of change from Elder and Vel and the others, the first Velkarath who grew up with the protocol rather than choosing it, travels to Callisto Station on a transit permit and finds Dara Voss in the observation deck at 3 in the morning because everyone who knows Dara Voss knows that is where she will be if it is 3 in the morning and she is at the station. The young Velkarath's name, translated loosely, means something like first question. They are not large for their kind, and their bioluminescence is still finding its pattern, and they stand in the doorway of the observation deck for a moment before coming in, which is the Velkarath equivalent of knocking. Dara looks up from the stars. "You can come in." They come in and stand beside her and look at the same stars and say nothing for a while, which is something both humans and Velkarath are capable of doing, in their own ways, and which is comfortable in its own way if you are with the right person. You are Voss, the young one says eventually, not a question. I am. You are the first. Yeah. They look at the stars together. The Orem belt is visible from this angle, a slow golden fire at the edge of the system. Was it worth it, the young one says, the choosing, the change? Was it worth what it cost? Dara thinks about this honestly, the way she tries to think about things, with the flatness that doesn't waver, the same steadiness she'd brought to inventories and watch schedules and impossible conversations. She thinks about the 612 names. She thinks about the 12 who were changed without choice and what it had meant to try to advocate for them in the years after, the partial reckonings and incomplete justices that were the best the situation had permitted. She thinks about the mornings she'd woken up in the first year and taken several minutes to locate herself, to feel where the human ended and the changed began, and find that the line was blurry in a way that would never not be blurry. She thinks about the council members who looked at her sideways. She thinks about the hard days. She thinks about Vel. She thinks about the melody. She thinks about what Strand said about 900 people singing between shift changes on a broken ship in the dark. Yes, she says. The young Velkarath is quiet for a moment. How do you know? Dara turns and looks at them, at the gold eyes finding their color, at the bioluminescence finding its pattern, at the expressions moving across the face in the Velkarath way, layered and simultaneous, and she sees in them the same thing she'd seen in Vel in the corridor. Something unresolved, something that was trying to become certain, something that was asking a question it didn't have the words for yet. She turns back to the stars. Come here, she says, and when the young Velkarath steps closer, she hums. Just 4 bars, the melody her mother gave her, the one with no name, steady and low and true. The young Velkarath is very still. What is that, they say? Something someone gave me, Dara says. When I needed it, I'll give it to you the same way. She hums it again. You don't have to do anything with it. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't mean anything specific. It's just something to carry. The young Velkarath listens. Their bioluminescence shifts very slightly into a warmer register. It sounds like something that has been carried a long time, they say. It has, Dara says, a lot of hands. All the way back. Well, you teach it to me. That's why I'm humming it. So at 3 in the morning in the observation deck of Callisto Station, in the 9th year of the coexistence protocol, a 52-year-old human woman and a young Velkarath, who was the 3rd generation of a choice that had changed 2 species, sat together and traded 4 bars of music that had no name, back and forth, until the young one had it, had the shape of it, had the weight of it, had the thing that it carried. And out beyond the windows, the Orem belt burned its slow golden fire, and the corridor lights cycled their amber rotation, and somewhere in the station Nessa was working late on a new map of the outer transit routes with her small, careful handwriting, and Carver's daughters were pilots now, both of them, flying the corridors their father had surveyed. And Pell was presenting his 3rd paper to the Xenobiology conference, and smiling for the first time in the photographs, because he had found something that warranted it. And Vel was in her cargo bay, which was not a cargo bay anymore, but something that had been adapted and readapted over 9 years into something that was genuinely hers. And she was, if Dara reached out with the new sense she had carried for 9 years, present and steady, the old vast field with all its layers, grief and wonder, and something that had resolved into a thing for which the word was possibly, in the human register that Dara now knew she always had access to, peace. Not absence of conflict peace, not the peace of things being finished, the peace of things being what they are and knowing it, the peace of having asked for what you needed in the dark and having it given. Dara hummed the last 4 bars into the quiet. The young Velkarath hummed them back. This is what remains when everything else burns away. This is what survives the crash and the taking and the dark and the years that follow. This is the thing that 612 people carried onto a ship bound for a new frontier. The thing that 900 people sang between shift changes on a broken hull. The thing that a geology surveyor kept in a breast pocket, and a hydroponics tech wrote in small, careful handwriting, and a 17-year-old boy carried so quietly that you only saw it when he held someone's hand. A melody with no name. Given, carried, given again. All the way out to the dark between stars and back. That's the thing about humans. We carry each other through.